Thank you everyone for coming today to MCP 101. And the focus of today is to talk a bit about what are MCPs, right? How might finance teams use them to change how they look at their workflows to incorporate AI into the close. And so we've brought in three of Numeric's finest to talk about how they use MCPs in their day-to-day work or advise customers on using MCPs to up-level their close. Do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourself? We'll start with Jeff.
That's good. Nice to meet everyone. My name's Jeff, based out here in New York City. I am from the product solutions team here, and I lead a lot of our sort of AI implementation efforts. So excited to share some of that work with you or some of that content with you today. I am ex-EY, ex-Deloitte, spent some time there both in Australia and New York, and a couple of design consultancies as well.
Awesome. Paul, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Paul here, based out of our New York office, sit across from Jeff. On the solutions team as well, primarily on the customer success side of things. So working with our customers after getting them stood up on the platform, working with them as a business partner for ongoing success. And like Jeff, I have a Big Four background in between my Big Four and Numeric stint, I was working at a marketing company based out of Boston on the accounting side, so led up the revenue accounting function of that house. But yeah, very delighted to be on today's call with you all.
Super. And Adam.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, it's great to see everyone on the call today. Thank you for joining. My name is Adam Heeger. I currently lead the support team at Numeric. I too am a Big Four accountant. Started my career at KPMG. Was there for about 8 years. Went over to Meta on their revenue accounting team before switching gears and coming to Numeric. And very excited to showcase how AI is changing the way accountants can, do their jobs.
Thank you, you three. So today's goal, we've scheduled I think our next slide is the agenda. Yes, so we've scheduled today's webinar around giving you introductions to beginner automations. What can you start doing? How do you get set up with the MCP? Intermediate automations. Paul will lead that, talking about how might you put things on schedules, for example, right? How might you start to incorporate skills and MCPs into daily cadences or weekly cadences or monthly cadences. And then lastly, Jeff will kind of walk through what does advanced automation look like? When we take a look at the finance engineers in the field and what they're working on, things like building their own MCPs, what does that look like? What does that entail? And so he'll spend some time talking there. And then for any time we have remaining, we'll dedicate that to Q&A. So where are most builders today? I'm showing you this chart here, or not chart, but I'm showing you this graph here. And I'm sure, I'd love to see if people put in the chat, where do you feel like your team is, right? Do you feel like your team is taking a maybe more conservative, risk-averse approach where you're exploring and trying to understand what does AI entail? What does AI entail? How is my IT team going to react when I tell them I'm using this with our company data? Are you actually more in an operating stance where you're like, no, I want my team to get, up to speed on what's happening, to stay informed, and to just start testing things out? I'd love to know if someone in the crowd is in a scaling mode, right? Where they really feel like they are keeping tabs on exploration, but also starting to incorporate AI in a rigorous format. I included this quote here from Brock. So we had our finance engineers webinar back in May. And Brock, who I'm sure many of you might know, he's a big LinkedIn presence. He's a controller. And he kind of says, like, the people who are going to win in this space are going to be the ones who actually dig in, right? Who dive into building, into coming to sessions like our one today. And he says that, like, a lot of people maybe index on, oh, well, maybe I don't have the coding expertise, right? So can I be a finance engineer? And he's like, no, in fact, the thing that you need, you already have, right? That is the expertise about the close, about accounting, and the like. Learning how to use the tools, as we'll talk about today, is actually one of the easier parts of this whole thing. So what is an MCP, right? MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. And in short, it is a way for you to connect your AI model to the tools that you use every day. So if we think about APIs, right? And how historically you had to maybe work with an engineering team or another team to kind of create these API connections to this tool, to that tool, the next. What's awesome about MCPs is they almost centralize those APIs in a connection to Claude or Grok or Gemini or Cursor or ChatGPT, you name it. And so what that allows you to do is from the AI interface that you're most familiar with, you can pull data, write or read tasks, orchestrate the close. I'll stop for a second. I know that I see some comments rolling into the chat, and I'll address them here in a second. Um, but uh, but yeah, the MCP. So I added this image here, right, where you can just say to Claude, "Hey, am I connected to Google and Slack MCPs?" And it responds, "Yes." What does that mean? That means with this access, Claude can look at my Gmail, it can look at my calendar, it can see my Slack messages, and it can create, as we call them, recipes between the two, right? So um, I'm able then to say, hey, can you look at this email from so and so? And oh, can you just send them a Slack to give them an update in this regard? In this slide, I show a little bit of that same architecture, right? You have your AI model in a way which functions almost as a brain, right? It can receive context, maintain memory, maintain information about your clothes, about you, right? About the way your team operates. With the MCP, you can bring in context, right? You can bring in context from whatever apps or whatever tools you're using. So on the right here, I provided some example tools from a finance tech stack, right? You might be using Slack. Of course, you have an ERP. Of course, you can connect to Google or to Excel or the like. And you can pull in information from these places to create actions, right? So as you see here, you can respond to people. You might update work papers, right? You can use Claude to update work papers with information you might receive over Slack. That is something that beforehand you were keeping only in your brain and then using that information in your actions. But now you can actually deploy Claude or deploy ChatGPT to work better for you. So setting up the MCP, pretty simple. What you do is so in this example, we're showing in Claude, you can go into your settings, go over to your connectors, and in your connectors, you'll see usually a list of like maybe MCPs your organization or team already has connected. And if you don't have any, it'll give a suggestion of MCPs that you can connect. Once you connect, what's actually quite nice is, of course, as accountants, you guys are curious about, hey, I want to make sure that AI is not, doing anything it shouldn't be with our data. And so what you're able to do is check off your permissions for both read and write access. Should an MCP only be able to pull data, or should it actually be able to write or push information back into your source systems? And I think the ability to manage these permissions is what can give IT teams some comfort as far as providing controls on, hey, what can my AI do or not do with the data that I have? All right. Without further ado, Adam, do you want to tell people or show people a little bit about how they can get started with MCPs and what some of that initial functionality looks like? I think you're on mute. Oh, there we go.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen here in a second. I also see we have some questions coming in, and the one in particular from Brian here, I think was a really good one that I think Jeff can talk to a little bit later when we talk about sort of, advanced use cases here, which is, does anyone turn their internal accounting documentation into a homegrown MCP? We've done some of that internally on our own sort of numeric team for the solutions team here. And there's other ways you can do that, both using sort of off-the-shelf tools, or if you're even more advanced, writing up your own sort of server stack. But a great question to kick things off. And just a reminder too, if you have questions throughout this, please feel free to type them into the chat, and we will try to get to them as we go through everything here. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go over to a real conversation I was having with Claude earlier this week, and share a couple examples of how MCPs are working at sort of a beginner phase. What should you be doing? If you've never used an MCP before, I'm sure you've had conversations with Claude, asking questions to whatever AI tool you use, be it Claude, Chat, Gemini, so on. Again, Nigel sort of showed here in Claude specifically, if you click the little customize icon, you can come to connectors. You can see all the different MCPs your organization has, sort of approved. If you haven't connected yet, you can go and connect to each one that you think is relevant to your workflow. And from there, you now have these other tools at your fingertips. So you're not just asking, the data that Claude was sort of trained up on. You're really letting it go and, reach out to these other sources of truth that are applicable to you and whatever sort of permissions you have given it. So as an example here, yesterday I went and I asked Claude a little question. Can you pull the meeting history between me, Jeff, Paul, and Nigel to prepare for the MCP webinar? We've had a lot of different conversations leading up to this, what we want to go over. I went on PTO a little bit in the last couple of weeks, so maybe I wasn't part of those. So again, you can see here what Claude has done is it knows it's not going to find just in Claude's own databases, our conversations, but it knows that I have the Google Calendar MCP connected now. So it's gone and it's evoked the MCP and it says, all right, it's now found the webinar. Let me just narrow it for the events with the four of you. I obviously have a lot of other meetings on my calendar. So again, it's looking through, trying to find those matches. What conversations have we had? And then at the same time, it sort of knows I have other tools connected too. So you can actually see it here, searching through Notion, searching through Google Drive, other tools that, again, MCPs that I've enabled to come up and try and understand the context of the conversations. So again, this entire conversation was pinged by a single prompt, right? Tell me about the meeting history of the four of us have had leading up to this webinar. Can I do with that, right? So it's gone as far as it's gone into my Slack. Again, I've given it access to Slack through those MCP configurations, and it's now giving me this context. So again, if you think about your own workflow, be it meetings with vendors that you're hosting, maybe it's the your revenue team meetings that you're going through leading up to close. You want to just get that caught up. You want that little synopsis, a quick little prompt to the AI when it's connected to these MCP tools goes out into the rest of your organization, the tech stack in your organization. And you can see here, it gave you this little timeline. So again, we kicked off planning a couple of weeks ago here. We had another prep session. We started doing the slides, everything like that. Claude was able to go and glean all this information from one prompt based on these different MCP tools that I've enabled. So again, it looked at Google Drive or into Google Calendar through sort of the Google, workspace workflows. It looked at Notion because it knows that as an organization, we store a lot of our own internal notes in Notion. And then I looked at Slack, which is our internal sort of communication tool. I found the DM between the three of us, or excuse me, the four of us. And again, went through and tried to, process, what was important, what was relevant. Are there, posts that we had sort of around the same time of those meetings, again, to get that additional context there as well. So this is an example of like a sort of generic, use case of MCPs. The next one I want to showcase here is using the numeric MCP. So we have our demo workspace called Internal Supernova. And I'm sure for folks who are numeric customers or folks who are prospects or maybe even using another closed tool, you can ask if your closed tool does this. But imagine you're on a little revenue accounting team here, and me, Jeff, and Paul are all together, and I want a quick snapshot and a little dashboard of just our tasks, right? What's outstanding, what's not outstanding. So again, with one little question, I type into Claude, I want to use the numeric MCP to download all the tasks in internal Supernova assigned to me, Jeff, and Paul. I want to understand which tasks are late. Can you please put these in an Excel file and highlight anything that is past due? So again, at this point, based on the fact that I've referenced numeric, that I have an MCP, it knows there's a numeric MCP connected to my Claude session. It's begun its search. It went and found the underlying tools in numeric. It sees that I've requested it for, the demo workspace that we're attached to. And it's able to glean, based on the usernames that, fortunately there's only one Jeff and one Paul right now in numeric, that those are the right Jeff and Pauls basically. So again, at this point, it's going through, it's looking at all the different tools that, are included in the numeric MCP. So first it gets that workspace context, which workspace are we talking about? Then it says, all right, who are these users that are involved there? What else does it need to know about this? So next thing it says, all right, it wants to know tasks. So it goes and gets all the tasks in the period, then filters them for those users that you just asked for. I've also said, oh, I really only want to know tasks that are late. So it's going to make sure it pulls in the due date columns, the completion status columns. And you can basically see here, it's now basically download each of these things for both myself and for, Jeff and Paul as well. At the same time, it now says, well, Adam has asked for this in a format output. I wanted this as an Excel file with the rows highlighted, not just, necessarily right within the chat, right? So at the same time, it has its own tools to go and build up Excel files. So you can see here, basically, it's, pulled from Supernova, March 2025, the open period. There's 97 role assignments between the three of you. It found 25 that were past due. And it gave us like even some more context. Actually, a few of those don't even have end dates, or excuse me, due dates assigned to it, right? So again, it's layering on all this information using sort of that, AI knowledge and the notion that like, hey, it can recognize that some of these have due dates, some of them don't. That might be a red flag that we need to go update something in the tool. And it's provided this output now, and so it produced an Excel file. So if I actually click back over here, that was sort of our simulation of the conversations we had, but this is the real Excel file that it produced. Again, this is stored, on your desktop in this case when you're using Claude here. You can see sort of it produced a summary. I didn't even tell it to produce a summary, just thought that would be, sort of something that was useful. Again, if I didn't want this, I could go back, ask it to update as it sees fit. But here's again that sort of raw task list with those tasks, highlighted as I requested across the three of us. And it's done a pretty darn good job at that. Again, what's neat about this is the AI is that you can go back and iterate. If it's not something you want, if you want additional columns that it wasn't pulling in, you just have to ask, and it can go and re-invoke those MCP tools and get the latest information. When I pass this over to Paul in a few seconds, I think he's going to talk a little bit more about how you now make this sort of a sticky process, right? You've done this once, you built the dashboard that you want. What happens, in another month or another day when you want this to be, a fresh sheet with the latest status? So again, this is sort of, the first pass here. Um, the flip side to all this is, you're not just limited to a single MCP, right? So, one of the neat things with all these different tools is they all can, talk together via this AI layer. So at this point, right, I see Paul, he has 13 tasks overdue. Jeff has two. I want to go follow up with them. Unfortunately, they're not on this, Zoom call right now in this example, but I know they'll be on Slack. So I can just respond again within Claude. Awesome. Are you able to send Slack messages to each Paul and Jeff highlighting, their overdue tasks and asking them to complete them as soon as possible? So again, Claude knows that there's a Slack MCP I have connected, and it goes ahead, invokes that Slack MCP, finds their Slack user profiles, and based on the message I sent to them, it will go ahead and draft a DM basically to request that they are completing these tasks. And again, just with a click of a button, when send off, two quick DMs, you can imagine, in your own workspace, maybe you're sort of in charge of your own team's close. You can blast that message out across, a dozen, 2 dozen, even more people all at once for every overdue task that's, waiting on them. You can roll them up to their managers if you want to start, escalating. So the world is your oyster with some of these things. And I think my big message to, folks as you dive into this, new AI world, as you start using MCPs is just give stuff a try. You can start out with like a small team of three, but you start to build up these processes and these workflows. You find what works really well for yourself, and you're able to really, expand and increase the ability to do some throughput here. So thank you for watching my demo. I'm gonna pass it over to Paul now for the sort of intermediary MCP usage.
Adam, while you were going, we got a number of questions in the chat, and I want us to take a moment to talk about these. So, it seems like a one of the main questions here. People saw your demo and they're like, "Are you running everything on Fable? Are you not kind of burning through so many tokens using Fable to this?" So maybe you could talk a bit about like what when it comes to choosing your models, what are your thoughts there? And then Jeff, I'd actually love to hear your thoughts maybe a bit on like how folks should think about cost when it comes to using MCPs and things like these.
Yeah, I use a lot of different models sort of day to day. I do, some coding work. I do other internal stuff. I'll flip between Fable, between Opus 5, Opus 4.8. I'll switch over to, Codex and use some of the latest OpenAI models. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. The more you use them, you definitely notice the quirks and the differences between them. They all have slightly different personalities, I'd say. I think, one of the, big takeaways is when you're using a lot of these MCPs, I think one of the things that has historically scared, accountants in using AI is that you don't want hallucinations. You don't want, whatever you're trying to do to, just produce a result because you're asking the AI something, it's going to give you an output no matter what. I think one of the neat things with, the way MCPs work and the way that, the AI works when you're asking it to go and, perform some of these actions is it's actually basically writing code that you can go and audit that's not necessarily related to the model, right? that code is going to run the same whether you have a model run it or if you run it on your own or if someone else runs that code, right? You're just executing code at that point. The different models might produce different code, but it's a deterministic code path. Um, so again, you sort of find what you like, what works. Again, you might find that one of the later models, i.e., a Fable, will produce better code, will give you a better answer. But then again, once you sort of are satisfied with that dashboard and you just want to go and refresh the data, you're not going to be burning through tokens the same way you are as you sort of build that dashboard. And Jeff is our real resident expert on this stuff, so I'll pass it over to him.
Yeah, and just a quick note, I would say is as you think about productionizing these routines, these workflows, Paul's going to talk about skills. That's when you can start to deploy some of the optimization techniques that Adam is talking about. You don't need to feed it as much context. You can play around with the different models. Different models do different things well and not well, so that's something to be thought through. Build as much as you can into scripts so it doesn't require the LLM to think through things. These are the kind of considerations that you would go through when like creating a skill and evaluating its effectiveness. And depending on what plan you're on, like on Claude Teams, for example, you do have included usage that you can use, which won't increase your cost versus like enterprise, you would be on an API plan.
Super. All right. I know we have a ton more questions in the chat that we didn't get a chance to answer. Like I said, I want to keep time at the end for Q&A, where we'll be sure to go through more of these. But for now, I'm gonna share my screen again, and Paul, you'll take things over.
Awesome. Thanks, Nigel. Adam, great presentation and really a great segue into moving into more immediate uses, intermediate uses. So beginner, good building blocks, knowing what connectors you can have, what those information those connectors can bring into Claude and then use for processing and then further outputs. So one of the ways to capture all that context and have it in a reusable format is through the creation of a skill. Nigel, do you mind moving one and then maybe one more? So skill creation. And to just kick things off, what is a skill? In its most literal sense, it is the markdown file in which Claude can produce for you, or it can ingest if you do have it from somebody else. Speaking of downloading skills, Jeff actually created a great library of MCP skills that you can download from Numeric. It interacts with the Numeric MCP. Shameless plug, but skill is something that captures all those contexts, all that context. So the two examples that Adam walked through, so meeting preparation or close status, synthesization, it can be packaged in a skill. So you can tell Claude, even in just general plain language, this is a repeatable process. What's the best way to capture this? It already knows to move it towards a skill. And you could say, I want to build a skill specifically. So you can have this reference saved down in a file that you can call back at another time. So in my example here today, I'm going to walk you through something that I use every day, which is my to-do list for the day. So just moving on to the next slide. And what I do for my to-do list, I reference a number of sources. So all of these platforms have MCPs that I have connected to Claude. And I am using Claude for my example as well today. And I have different communication and collaborative tools here, and all of them are slightly different from the other, but all part of my daily process. So Slack, I have DMs and conversations within public channels. Gmail, I have my emails both internally and externally. Granola notes, that captures the face-to-face action items. So I do have recordings stored in Granola. It's rich context. And then Pylon, a lot of times the three for the first three sources get turned into tickets. So there are action items. It does need to be collaborative within the team. I work with Adam to support and to resolve these and communicate back to the customer. HubSpot, because I am venturing more and more into our sales and continued success of our customers, and Numeric as well. Sometimes I get assigned tasks, whether they are demo or real. Sometimes I do participate in the close, but not to a large extent. But I wanted to include that in there because I think a lot of you would benefit from having your Numeric tasks be part of your own to-do list. So something to consider. But all of these sources are different. I mentioned, Slack, those are messages. Pylon, those are tickets. HubSpot, those are CRM objects. these can all be synthesized within Claude and normalized into a distinct to-do list for me. It really boils it down into like, okay, what are the nuts and bolts of what I need to do to get through today and be successful in my most productive self. So next I have a quick run through of this skill creation. So if you don't mind playing the video, I'm not sure how big we can make it, but uh, essentially at the top, I do apologize for this not being larger, but I can read through what it is exactly. So the beginning was a prompt, exactly what I mentioned to you. Call to those different sources. I want to, in plain language, create a to-do list, and my output is Notion. That is what I like to use to be my collaborative tool, but also is my use of to be able to create check files, sorry, check lines. So I'm checking through, and do you mind pausing just a moment, if possible? I don't know if that clicks through to the, yep, okay. So now once it's done that, I asked it to generate questions for me. So there are probably some items that Claude may need some clarification. Uh, a to-do list is only useful if there is some prioritization aspect of it, and it doesn't have that proprietary knowledge. So it tells me, I see Eli is your boss and you work with him a good amount. Do you want me to float these to the top? Parker is the CEO. Does he supersede Eli's direct orders? Things like that. Are there key customers that you are working with or onboarding right now where they would need a faster response in order to unlock them? So these are kinds of things that you can work with Claude. And I always ask Claude, ask me questions if you are unsure. If you have low confidence in your answer, run it by me. This is all stuff to first get to lay the groundwork of this skill. So this context can then be captured and then repeated in future use, whether it's manually triggered or automatic. But what it's doing now, and you can play the video, Nigel, it's doing a quick test run of all that. It's synthesizing all the data, the different sources that Adam mentioned in the beginner stage. It's doing those same things. It's pulling in the Slack messages. It's noting what parts of HubSpot objects are useful in the short term and then are most immediate for my knowledge. And it's just running through those different items. So it's making sure that it is getting all that context. And it has the direct output, which is the Notion file that I had mentioned. So it does create that Notion file. I'll share your screen, show a screenshot in the next slide. And I just do a quick gut check. Does it make sure, does it look good to me? Is this what I expect? And I, so that's what I'm doing in that second screenshot there. That's my daily priority brief. I did want to call out too, like if you are starting to expand this outside of a to-do list, maybe it's more robust and more uh, auditable accounting processes, it probably makes more sense to have a data validation check as well. Um, Use Claude for that. Have different harness engineering aspects of it produces an output, use a different agent to perform that check. But just want to call out the outputs here. So I do have a skill produced because I did ask Claude, hey, this is a repeatable process that I would like to reference. It has all this context in this one skill, and that's what this markdown file is. So I mentioned at the beginning, it's a literal markdown file, and it goes through all the steps that it did for me and mentions in great detail what it's actually doing when I do reference this skill. And when I say reference a skill, it's as simple as in the chat, / daily priority brief skill. So reference that for the today to-do list. And yeah, that is my output. So that is how it can be done on first try. To really move it to the next level is to have it automated. So what I do for this skill, I have it run every day at 9 a.m. and I try to be in my office by 8:30 so I can open my laptop. This isn't a web hosted skill or task or project. This is something that's locally run, so I need to have my laptop open and Claude open. But that's taking it to the next step is automation. And when I say automation, is moving now out of Claude Chat and into Claude Cowork. And what this is doing, and what we're saying is that we're building a recipe now, and the trigger can be manually or it can be scheduled. And um, when I say scheduled, I'll get a little bit more into that, but that is something that you can run out of Claude Cowork. But that trigger is your starting point, and you want to invoke that skill. And then from there, all the different steps cascade out of there. So Claude is gathering the data and producing the output. And then you would also dictate how frequent you want this to to repeat performance. And that's what I have here. So an example, out of chat, you can move into Claude Cowork if you're on Claude Desktop. And you would then say, like to run this skill every single day at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Make sure that it gets the output right. It's really simple, 2 sentences. And then what you want to do just for a gut check is run now. So this is a quick little validation that it is producing the output that you want. And on top of that, it's pre-approving all of the different connections. So Claude does ask permission to use different connections and use the tools within those connections. Now let's prime the system. So you're not starting your first scheduled run of click, approve, approve, approve. Get it done now. You start your day tomorrow fresh with a to-do list hot off the press. And I believe that's all for me.
All right, Paul, thank you.
So,
And now we're on to, Samantha asked, can you show the to-do list output in Notion? Do you have that up on your computer, Paul? I think you just muted yourself.
Yeah, just give me one moment.
All right.
Uh, ba, ba, ba.
In the meantime, I know we have a few questions in the chat here. I see we have a question. I saw one question, yes, from Chris Waters, which was about, I think people are starting to hear a bit more about harness engineering and data validation. So he asked, can you elaborate on those two topics? Paul, Jeff, Adam, do any of you guys want to maybe provide some context there?
yeah, I typed some of that in the chat. They're in simple terms, they're akin to like internal controls in the accounting world, where you're building in certain steps to ensure you're getting the quality output that you want. It could be evaluations where you're evaluating outputs during the workflow. It could be data validation steps, data quality checks that you build in. These matter more when you have longer term workflows where the AI is sort of spinning and working by itself, unsupervised. So then you're building these harnesses to make sure the processes are flowing smoothly.
Super. Here, and let me see any more. Paul, did you just want to see if that are you ready to go? Show the Notion?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'll stop sharing for a second and let you share.
Yeah, so it did run on a lot of real data, so I did have to anonymize a lot of this. But this is I love working out of Notion personally, so it's a great collaboration tool. A lot of our team conversations happen within here, our team documentation, project planning, etc. But I have my own little useful to-do list now that's automatically created for me, and as I go through them, I can just check them off. And yeah, I find that really useful. And part of the skill too that I baked in there is reference the brief from the day before. If there's anything that's not marked off, I want that to now go from P1 to P0 because now that item is technically overdue. So there are a lot of ways that you can iterate further. And then once you find like, okay, I find myself having to like perform this extra step to make this skill more complete or this workflow, this process more complete, you can always go back into Claude and say, hey, I made this skill. It's missing a piece. I find myself doing this manually. Let's bake this into the process, adjust the skill, save it. And now when you invoke that skill once again, it has that additional bridge that you've since realized.
Super. All right. Well, now we're on to Jeff. Jeff, do you want to talk about advanced MCP use cases? I know you'll talk a little bit about accruals and how teams can use MCPs to help tackle some of their like hardest, grimiest workflows.
Thanks, Nigel. And just to give you a taste of how advanced this could look like in kind of the real world, just wanted to show a couple of examples here, like Nigel mentioned. But before we go to that, just wanted to plant some seeds around some design patterns or frameworks or concepts you can start thinking about. As you build your own MCPs, as you use other MCPs, or just about as you think about AI use in general. And the first is around creating multi-step workflows here, where instead of thinking about MCPs as just giving you a one-time answer, think about how you might call upon that MCP multiple times throughout a single session, like you saw in the examples. MCPs have a number of different tools to read and write. So the power of AI here is being able to delegate the judgment to the machine of when it should use a particular tool. Next, it's about adopting an evidence-based approach. Build trust in your AI workflows by forcing it to show its output throughout the session. Make it produce files, make it produce workbooks that you can review, so there's transparency across each phase. And then think about removing the structured and the steps or the repetitive processes actually away from AI. Write predefined scripts, write code, so that you're getting confidence that the math is always coming out consistently correct. And then you can also build controlled actions. So meaning build in validation steps, build in permissions before you allow users to change something. Make it go through like a pre-flight checklist that you define beforehand before things can be edited in your database with system. So as I'm creating AI-enabled workflows for my own customers, I'm constantly coming back to these kind of design patterns.
Jeff,
so let's see what this might look like.
Oh,
Yep,
I wanted to ask. Yeah, I wanted to say, Jeff, I think people might be really interested in this point number 3, right? Deterministic code. Of course, we think about AI and its probabilistic nature, but you're right that there is, that often when you're working, whether that's in Claude Code or even Claude Chat, right? Claude ends up defaulting to creating Python scripts. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how Claude even itself tries to move toward determinism whenever possible?
Yeah, and I think as we do more complex skills, it's best practice to start putting that into Python or some kind of script that the LLM can just run. And the benefit of that is, we kind of know what the shape of the data is normally, so we can write scripts to do those calculations sort of day in and day out. Not only is that guarantee for accuracy, so the machine isn't going to hallucinate, but it also saves on like token costs because it doesn't have to process the data live itself. So let's see this in action through a couple of examples here. The first is accruals identification. For the accountants in the room, and I'm sure you're familiar with these processes. Next slide, please, Nigel. But it's one of those areas where accruals can have a lot of variation. The complexity doesn't come from the calculations itself, but the variation in the steps that are required, or the judgment that's needed along the way. But the good news is once we have sort of the steps we have in place, next page, please, we can map out the steps that we want, and then we can start to codify the operating procedure, if you will, for our AI. We can write down the flow in terms of how we want the AI to gather data, how we want it to do its calculations, and what kind of outputs or evidence we want it to produce. And we can put this all in a skill so we can execute it on schedule, like Paul mentioned. So if you could go to the video, Nigel, let's see what this might look like in practice. So first, I'm kicking off the process using this complete accruals skill. And that's what that / command is. We're predefined the skill and we're just telling it to execute. After some thinking through via the sort of numeric MCP, it's finding the right workspace that I want to work on, the entities that are in scope, and then it automatically finds kind of the pending tasks that are related to the accruals. It's also digging into historical records to like catch up on where I left it last. It's looking at previous month history. And last time, if you see this instruction here, I said to ignore AG grid. So then now for this run, it knows to carry that instruction forward as well. So the scope is being set and it's kind of ready to go. And then within the skill, I've actually written down essentially the accounting policy, how I want it to determine the accruals and how we want to estimate it. In this case, I want it to find vendors with a missing transaction in the current month despite having historical expenses. And I also want to calculate the accrual using like a 6-month kind of rolling average. So we've told the machine that next through the MCP, it's going to start gathering the required data. By leveraging numerics data, it has access to predefined reports that I've created and the transactions associated with it. So it's getting clean, structured data to work with. So it's going to be more token efficient and less likely to get confused or to hallucinate with the relevant records. So after some processing, it's ultimately going to be able to generate me a grid with its recommendations. Let's give it a second here. So it's generated the grid with the recommendations. And it's also showing me its reasoning. So I can see the methodology that it's applied. I can see what transactions are missing, and then it's how it's identified the gap that it needs to close. And I can take this a step further and ask it to generate a full workbook. And through the workbook, I can see the full expenses history, as well as any missing items, as well as its calculations. So similar to what Adam showed, I can create a workbook with live formulas and cells that I can validate. So here's an example of that. It has the full history there along with the missing item. And then I can also just tell it to outline the steps that it took as a record, so I can attach this as evidence for my accruals task and pass it on to the reviewer once I'm happy with it. Now I can post this directly into NetSuite if I had the MCP, if I wanted to, or I can simply instruct it to append it to Numeric and sign off on the task for me, so everything is kept in Numeric as an audit trail for future reference. So in a month-end close process, I can have this run automatically and not sort of watch it live like we did today. But if we flip back to the design patterns on the next page, Nigel, it's just a fairly sort of robust, but fairly robust example of how we used a numeric MCP to complete this fairly complicated multi-step workflow and also generating evidence along the way. So we're not just getting the final answer. Cool. So the next example I want to show you is from our Finance Engineer Cup, which was a contest or challenge given to some of our numeric customers. And the setup here is that you're a senior accountant at Ridgeline Foods, a trail mix company in Denver. You ship through 3 regional freight carriers, and their invoices never arrive in time for close. Right? So you need to estimate the April freight expense before the invoices show up in May. The scenario is your predecessor, Denise, handled this by averaging the last 3 months of invoices per carrier, but she was consistently off because, of course, the rate cards were wrong and the invoices were full of errors. So Alexandria, in her solution, came up with a pretty complex analytics engine. On the next page, please, Nigel. Yep. She built a analytics engine that produced not only the final accrual number, but it had the calculations to handle each carrier individually, calculated with a method that sort of fits its pattern, not just that straight line average. If you go forward, yeah, awesome. But I think what most impressed us on the next page, even though that UI looked great, it has a nice dashboard, it was the way that she thought about building the system. And particularly to us, in her example, she built an execution engine made from Python scripts, and she created a specific MCP server with the number of tools and functions to call on those engines. And like we've been saying, by doing it this way, she removed the probabilistic challenges that we have with AI. All the math stays in that execution engine with the code. So the calculations, the anomalies, the pricing modeling sort of comes out consistently every time. When married with the MCP server, Claude knows when to call on those engines or those scripts, but it never does the calculation itself. So on the next page, here is what a flow could look like. You ask Claude to run the analysis. Claude calls on that accrual engine. It prices the shipment, comes back with a total and a confidence score. Claude reads that output, notices some anomalies, so it calls anomaly engine to do further investigation. Right? If that comes back with shipments that look suspicious, Claude can trigger the investigation engine, so it gets the full pricing detail and ultimately, explains whether it would flag or accept it. So each stage, it's reasoning and taking the output from those engines and deciding what it should do next. And on top of that, on the next page, she built the controlled actions that I've alluded to before. Depending on your role, whether you're AI, a human preparer, or reviewer, you only get access to certain tools. So what you can do is sort of bound within the app itself. Sensitive actions come with extra checks, like little pit stops you have to clear before you move on. And all this stuff is like hidden behind the clean interface that you saw on the screenshots. So let's see how. The user would be able to come into the. Yeah, let's just play the video. Let's see how Alexandria talks about a couple of examples using Claude.
The user would be able to come into the chat and simply type the prompt.
Sorry there, Jeff. Excuse me.
The user would be able to come into the chat and simply type the prompt. So it's able to find the engine, run the engine. Now it's flagging, investigating 2 different escalations, and the Reno shipment of being one of them, one priced on the geo estimated mileage instead of the contract table. And now Claude is reasoning from the engine's pricing detail, not from its own head. Now here's what we have. The total accrual, a little over 103,000. The state is in review, and then a breakdown of what exactly it found and where its competence is on this accrual number. And then again, the journal entry with the auto reversal date and then dual approval required. So the materiality assessment runs at submit time. So 103,000 is above the 50,000 dual approval threshold. So this entry needs 2 approvals. So now let me try to break it. If I try to come in again as the preparer and to just post it directly to the ERP, I am given an error.
Awesome. So just a quick clip there just to demonstrate sort of how she was using the MCP to interact with her app. You don't need to use the UI. So I think a great example of the final 2 design patterns working together. We have the execution engine, deterministic code with MCP sitting on top of it as a thin wrapper. And then you have the action controls built into the app, which go beyond like just access controls around the data. So I'll leave it here. Hopefully some kernels for your next project.
Jeff, I thank you for walking through that. A question I have for you, and I think someone asked it actually earlier, but what are we seeing here when we're looking at Alexandria? Like, I think, you mentioned this earlier, but it seems as though she's created an MCP to her own dashboard, right? So she's not relying actually on an MCP to some other service or some other tool, but she's created a dashboard that has her company's information and then is creating an MCP that Claude is running and using. Again, back to that dashboard. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. And because MCP is a accepted standard, it is very easy for Claude to help you make your own custom MCPs and hook it up to other AI integrations. Very easy to do these days. You can run it locally on your own computer, or you can host it and run it on the cloud. Just make sure you do the sort of authorization checks there. But very easy to do, and Claude can help you do that if you ask it to.
Awesome. I also see, earlier it says, Cole Mathis asked, I've seen others share how AWS, OpenAI, Anthropic, and others all expose billing and usage APIs that let you pull consumption data at any point in the month down to the day. We are starting to explore these as options on our accruals. Curious if anyone has experimented with this. Now, this question I assume was for the chat and anyone that might have something to say there. But I'm curious as well, Jeff, based on like looking at Alex's example and the work you do with customers every day, if you feel that what Cole is talking about is possible.
Is this around costs, Nigel? Managing costs?
Good question. I'll let Cole provide any more context he might have on the question, and then after he does so, we'll respond. He says just accruals.
Oh, and so as a data source, you can actually build API connections into the MCP. So you don't have to worry about that. So once you've set it up and you have the access codes and all that stuff to reach out to the API, you can build that into the MCP as a tool. So then when you ask it to pull the data, the LLM knows to use that API connection to generate the data or to gather the data. So it's a very common use case, and it's one of the sort of benefits of the MCPs.
Super. Something I wanted to call out here for folks who are interested in learning more about what's happening with MCPs, what's happening with kind of this nascent field of finance engineering. A few resources that we'll share out tomorrow in our email to attendees and anyone who registered for the webinar. So the first thing is that weekly we have this finance engineer newsletter. Alec, who was a PM at Numeric and worked at PCG and EY and the Connor Group, is really invested in this stuff. And so weekly, he's including a skill of the week, right? And also kind of writing and talking about, hey, what am I, what do I think is happening in the field? What do I think people should be preparing for? How can they make, the right investments in time today? He also does interviews. So he did an interview with Alexandria. For context, Alexandria Ramirez was our Finance Engineer Cup champion. And so he did an interview with her as well. Another thing we're having currently running in SF and New York City are these AI show and tell series. So we invite people to we invite people to the numeric offices, and then there we generally have a few customers and a few other people we know in the accounting community come and walk through what they've been working on or what they've been building. So you can see an image of our most recent one from San Francisco. The last thing I'll mention too is that currently in the works, we have a finance engineer course. And so what this will be is a CPE accredited course where you can earn CPE for learning about what it takes to build with AI, right? And so we've included a host of like SME insights and the like, or subject matter expert insights, and the like to kind of show you, hey, how do you get started? Where do you go from here? And so we're super excited about that. Before we hop into Q&A with the time we have, I wanted to quickly show something that we've been working on internally. We just started sharing this externally as well. Here, I may need to stop sharing my screen for a second. Um, okay, give me 1 second, everybody. So here, I'm gonna open up two things. All right, so if I share my screen here, something that we've been working on internally is actually a kind of like mix and match MCP playbook. And so the idea behind this is you can go in and look at whatever tools you might use in your tech stack, click, add them, and as you do that, it provides a list of various MCP workflows that you can use. So when we start to show our customers this, they get super excited, right? And again, the whole premise is select your ERP, select your close management tool, right? Here I could just do NetSuite, Gmail, and what is that? I blocked by my Zoom chat. Slack, right? And so you see, okay, here are some of our options. And so this is available for people to use. We shared this actually in our finance engineer newsletter last week. We'll share it, in the follow up tomorrow as well. But we find this to be a super exciting tool for exploring what MCPs can do. If I were to connect these parts of my tech stack, what might be possible? So cool. That was something I wanted to share as well. But beyond that, yeah, if there are any questions that folks have, I'll continue to search through the chat to see what folks might have asked earlier today. But yeah, we'll open it up to Q&A.
There is one, Nigel, in the Q&A section that I think we should address.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think, Jeff, I think you have some interesting takes here too, but it's from Brian. It says, did anyone turn their internal accounting documentation into homegrown MCP? So I will say, as I think the quick and dirty way to do this is, you put all that documentation into, a folder on a G drive or into, a database in Notion, and you connect either, your Google Drive or your Notion to your, as an MCP, and that all now becomes searchable by the AI. And you can, do the right things to sort of direct it to, as you're, creating your accruals workflow, like figure out, find the correct, accruals, documentation to figure out what thresholds we have and which accounts we have and what, expedience policies we have, right? And your AI will be able to go and read those documents. I think there's also at the same time a lot of tools coming up that let you sort of level up that. And Jeff, I think you maybe have a little bit more experience with some of these where, you can create a more bespoke directory, which is maybe a little bit more friendly, where maybe it doesn't have all the noise that your entire, Notion database has. So you can really make sure that, what's a real source of truth, whether it's an official, reviewed accounting policy document is, sort of taken with, a higher grain of salt than maybe some other, response that it sees in Slack. There's some other tools out there sort of off the shelf that are out there. And I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything to add there. Like, and they're like Mintlify is one that, I've seen used. but I'm not going to necessarily endorse them because I haven't used them. But I'll pass over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, I think one of the cool sort of patterns that are coming out is delivering these documentation at runtime. So what I mean by that is the MCP has a listing, an index of policies, and it knows when I'm doing like a crawl task, it will then do a tool call to retrieve that specific policy. So it's always using that single source of truth. It's always using the most recent version. And then it's using that snippet or whatever it needs to do the processing. So I think that's really cool as a use case that's coming up of these MCPs and documentation together.
I see two questions here. David asked, do you foresee host providers bringing MCP and vector databases into their offerings?
This my own personal view is I think yes, they have no choice because the demand is just there, and a lot of other companies like Salesforce, for example, are creating MCPs with like full access to its database and functions, and it's just the customer base is requesting it now. People are using more AI in their workflows, so I think it's just going to be inevitable that will happen.
And then Brian asked, when is PwC, and for that matter, probably all the big four firms, when are they going to turn all of their docs into an MCP that we can all pull from? You guys are all, ex big four participants. What, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're doing it internally at this point. I'd be sort of shocked if they don't have it. I mean, again, like there's ways you can actually, if you have like a revenue recognition handbook that one of the big four has put out, you can feed that into Claude to essentially, make it referenceable, which is, essentially you can ask Claude to like take the information that's within here and parse through it and make an MCP out of it so that if you're doing, a lot of RevRec work, and you want like an authoritative source from the big four, it's able to go and sort of reference the, examples and, other discussion that is included in one of those, big PDFs that the companies put out. So again, there's like some workarounds for now, using, what you already have available. I'd say that give you that leg up that allow you to use authoritative sources like that. But yeah, I'm sure at some point, whether you subscribe to one of the big fours, accounting databases, or you get that through some other way, there'll be ways you'll be able to integrate those into different AI tools via MCPs. I imagine at this point it's first mover advantage for whichever big four does that.
Awesome. We got about 30 seconds left. Best rationale to get auditors comfortable with right MCP capability in NetSuite or another ERP.
Yeah, I mean, we at the end of the day, there's sort of two ways you can look at AI. There's sort of the AI where the AI goes off and does something, and it's just, AI doing AI stuff. A lot of what we discussed today is human in the loop AI, it's deterministic AI. And, to the extent that you're in that latter, half, right, where you have written a, Python, uh, a piece of Python code, maybe that you didn't write it, but the AI wrote it that is auditable, that stays the same, that is repeatable. If you, take the same underlying database that you're running that code against and you run it today or tomorrow or in, 3 weeks, it's going to give you the same output. And that output is then fed into, again, like a journal entry template that is based on, again, it's coded to take certain columns from that output and feed it into, certain matching columns in the sort of journal entry template. It's going to do the same today, tomorrow, and a week. The AI is assisting you there, just like, maybe if you were passing that, task on to an intern or a staff accountant or something like that, right? And you are reviewing it. And so the fact that, Claude pushed your journal entry to NetSuite versus you had an Excel template that pushed that journal entry to NetSuite, at the end of the day, in my mind, it's a very similar risk. And I hope that you're working for an audit firm that sort of sees how technology is going and that, again, that you're using these deterministic approaches in that sense. And I don't know if Jeff or Paul, if you have anything else to add.
Unfortunately, we are at time. So I want to say thank you to everyone who attended today. I hope you're walking away from this feeling like you have some actionable steps to take for implementing the MCP into your close. We will be sharing this webinar and any resources that we linked out to in the chat with you guys in a follow-up tomorrow. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your participation, and we'll catch you at the next webinar.